obstacles preventing a Gaza ceasefire agreement from taking place despite the intense mediation efforts by Egypt, Qatar, and the United States?
Good evening to you and to the viewers. Of course, the main obstacle is represented in the maps that the Israeli side wants to draw in on the grounds by establishing a humanitarian city in the Morag and the south of Rafah, which will include 600,000 Palestinians. The purpose of the city is to displace the Palestinians later on. This is completely rejected by the Palestinian resistance and Hamas, as they rejected the Israeli existence inside the Gaza Strip, and they insist to have the full Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, so that we can have a deal in accordance with the time frame agreed upon during the negotiations in Doha during the past few weeks and during the meetings of President Trump and Netanyahu in the White House last week. And therefore there are efforts being exerted to convince Israel of changing the maps and setting a new schedule for the Israeli troops withdrawal. The Egyptian delegations is running negotiations and talks with US and Doha and Israel so far to save the negotiations.
Now, from your point of view, what could be the implications of Israel reportedly activating the Hannibal Protocol? And how would that reflect on any future negotiations or military tactics on the ground?
If Israel committed to the Hannibal Protocol, this will have major implications on the Israeli domestic relations, or domestic public, as soldiers will be killed and the protests will persist inside the Israeli street by the families of the detainees now being detained by Hamas. Netanyahu now is facing two very difficult choices: the pressures being exerted by the families of the detainees, and at the meantime the US pressures to carry out a deal in accordance with the Witkoff proposal, the amended Witkoff proposal. If we would have the protocol activated, this will have a lot of negative implications on the Netanyahu government and the far-right officials, because a lot of Israeli soldiers falling dead or killed by Hamas in Gaza and Deir al-Balah will have catastrophic results by the families of these soldiers being killed by Hamas.
If I may ask you about the upcoming UN conference on the two-state solution that will be taking place, do you believe this diplomatic push can realistically influence the situation in Gaza, or is it too disconnected from immediate ground realities?
Certainly, there is a state of division. The UN conference was scheduled for the 7th of the past month with French-Saudi sponsorship, and in my call with Ahmed Abu said that there are US-Israeli pressures on the United Nations and on France to being exerted not to have the conference till the end of this month, and he sees that there is a difficulty regarding the detainee exchange deal, in addition to the Israeli pressures on different states so that they would not give the recognition on the two-state solution. So it is very early to talk about any tangible measures or hosting this conference on the ground, as long as we do not have a permanent deal to end the Israeli occupation and to stop the hostilities and the killings and a detainee exchange for the dead bodies and the Palestinian prisoners, and an early recovery and reconstruction plan And this conference is closely tied to these items and the recognition of the Palestinian state.
Well, we're speaking about a very dire situation and a field blockade and its impact on the hospitals in Gaza. Do you think there could be urgent measures taken by the international community or by the US or by authorities to prevent further deaths among vulnerable patients, particularly infants?
We need to acknowledge that the international community completely 100% failed to stop the massacre and to save the lives of Palestinians who are being killed, around 100 to 120 people killed every day due to the genocidal war. And there are some efforts that might be promising, which is the last agreement between the European Union and Israel by the end of last week, to allow a humanitarian aid, food and medical supplies in exchange for the European Union not imposing punitive sanctions on Israel or to freeze the economic agreement. There are talks for more humanitarian aids with cooperation with the United Nations and the global organizations UNRWA and the Palestinian Red Crescent. If these efforts succeed by the European Union, there will be a state of Israeli acceptance to a deal which will indicate that with the ongoing negotiations in Doha, there will be a potential for a permanent lasting deal in 2 days after the new developments related to reconsidering the maps provided by Israel, especially that Egypt is now negotiating tirelessly for a deal during the upcoming few hours. The Daytoni exchange and the Israeli withdrawal in accordance with a time frame to be set after the Doha negotiations.
Now, the severe heat wave and the collapsed health infrastructure, which is putting the humanitarian situation into dire and more dire situation. What can be an immediate humanitarian interventions to alleviate the Gaza's worsening crisis, particularly under the UN Charter that describe those people as population under occupation?
Certainly, there has been no real tangible measures after 100 days of the resumptions of the genocidal operations after the 18th of March. The death tolls are worsening and increasing of the Palestinian people as the Israeli troops is creating more and more death traps for Palestinians seeking aid and food. There is only one promise: to have a US intervention and for the European Union to work with the United Nations and the Arab partners to stop the fight and the hostilities and to allow a certain number of humanitarian aid trucks, fuel and food and medical supplies